Hi, my name is Harrison, and I identify as an out proud gay man. I am one of the over 10 million Americans that identify as LGBTQ. According to a poll from Gallup in 2017, this number is on the rise, over 3% from 2014 to 2016 over all income and education levels. However, you can still be fired from your job in over half of the United States just for being gay. Over 65 countries across the world will also throw you in jail just for being gay. Homosexuality is considered a crime. The LGBTQ community has been marginalized over the years, which has resulted in inequality and discrimination, requiring an ongoing fight for equal rights and representation. From the first brick of the Stonewall riots to the HIV/AIDS epidemic to the fight for marriage and adoption rights, the road has not been easy. There are still many barriers to overcome, including how people in the LGBTQ community are more at risk for being victims of anxiety and depression, as well as the extremely high rate of hate crimes and murders, particularly among people of color and trans people of color. My teammates and I hope to educate you along this rainbow, representing the journey of the LGBTQ community. First, here's Tiffany to talk about some key historical moments in the LGBTQ movement.
Thank you, Harrison. The Declaration of Independence states, all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. On the contrary to what Thomas Jefferson claimed we all have the right to as humans, this has not been the case for minorities, specifically those in the LGBTQ plus community, which is what I want to talk to you all about today. As far as we know in history, there has always been discrimination and persecution towards those in the LGBTQ plus community. Since the 1600s, the LGBTQ plus people have been murdered, seen as having a curable disease, and thought to be mentally abnormal. According to the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, GLSEN, in 1624, Richard Cornish of the Virginia colony is tried and hanged for sodomy. Tried and hanged. Next, Aaron Blackamore, a journalist and historical author, discloses that conversion therapy began in the late 1800s. For those that don't know, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Defamation, better known as GLAAD, defines conversion therapy as any attempt to change a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Furthermore, between 1952 and 1973, homosexuality was seen as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. To think that homosexuality stopped being seen as a mental disorder only in 1973 shows us how crucial the gay rights movement really is. The gay rights movement really started with the Stonewall riots and assisted in gaining several political wins due to their increased visibility, but then stigmatized by the AIDS outbreak. The Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights states that on June 28, 1969, a group of gay customers at a popular bar in Greenwich Village grew angry at the harassment by police at the Stonewall Inn and began to riot. These riots birthed what we now know as the gay rights movement. 1 year later was the first Pride Festival in New York City. History.com mentions that after these riots, movement made progress, including several openly LGBT individuals securing public office positions in 1974, and a transgender woman, Renee Richards, being able to play at the U.S. Open tennis tournament as a woman in 1977, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling. However, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization focusing on national health issues, states that the first case of AIDS was reported in the U.S. in 1981. When 5 relatively healthy homosexual males died from what we now know as AIDS, it began to stigmatize, and later on, officials initially had called it a gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID. But thanks to the gay rights movement, there has been a lot of progress that we get to see today. However, with progress always comes setbacks as well. During the Obama administration, the Supreme Court granted same-sex marriage as legal in all states. Love wins. Sadly, a year later, after this important legislation, there was a mass shooting at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, killing 49 people and wounding 53 more. as reported by the Orlando Sentinel. The Pulse shooting hits close to home. Several friends of mine lost many loved ones. This fear and pain I witnessed amongst my loved ones who are a part of the LGBT community still pains me to this day. There's so much pain and loss. Unfortunately, according to Penn State University, this year alone, 117 bills were introduced in 33 states to restrict the rights of transgender people. So, lastly, we've seen the negative and detrimental viewpoints on this community and its effect. We've seen the starting points of the movement and some political gains, and are currently getting to see firsthand the wins and losses for the LGBTQ plus community. We clearly have a lot of work to do, but it's always important to see how far we've actually come. So I'm going to leave you with this. We all get to play a part in this fight for equality, and I pray for the day that we can accept love is love. Next is Emily to talk about LGBTQ rights in other countries. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Emily. I'd like to give a brief insight into the rights of LGBTQ plus community in the United States of America versus in other countries. The community has received hate from all over the world, mainly stemming from religious beliefs. In 1924, the United States' first organization supporting gay rights formed. In the 1950s, groups specifically for U.S. gay rights came out. While the ideas seemed to be spreading, the fight for rights had many obstacles. Some notable setbacks were the federal government banning gay people from working for them, and the American Psychiatric Association actually listed homosexuality as a mental disorder. It took until the 1960s for the first U.S. state to decriminalize homosexuality. Activists had sit-in protests and the infamous Stonewall riot. Fast forward to the 1990s, and the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy was created, and AIDS gave politicians leeway to push an anti-gay rhetoric. In 2015, the United States Supreme Court finally made gay marriage legal throughout the country, and the next year, the military allowed transgender service members to openly serve. However, President Trump reversed many of the great strides of progress made for the LGBTQ plus community. And then, President Biden overturned the new ban on transgender service members, once again allowing them to serve. While hate continues to fester, progress continues to be made. However, the United States isn't the only country with turbulent LGBTQ plus rights. According to the Pew Institute's website, some of the reasons acceptance of homosexuality varies is based on countries' different politics, religions, education, and economics. Now that I've gone over a quick background on what it's like for LGBTQ plus citizens in the US, I want to talk about some of the differences faced around the world. Canada, Sweden, and Norway are some of the most LGBTQ plus friendly countries. Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Malaysia are some of the most dangerous. Forbes says that majority of the countries outlawing same-sex relations were once under British rule, who implemented the anti-homosexual laws. Acceptance of homosexuality has been increasing in recent years, though. Even countries where it's still outlawed, acceptance among citizens is growing. According to Business Insider, 35% of member nations of the United Nations still has homosexuality outlawed, and only less than 30 countries allow same-sex marriage. Sweden, one of the most accepting countries, bans any type of LGBTQ discrimination and doesn't impose censorship. Sweden allows equal marriage, adoption, and housing rights, along with allowing changing of gender without surgery. The majority of countries banning homosexuality are in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa. In fact, some countries even have death penalties for homosexuality activity. In Nigeria, you can be jailed for over a decade or killed if you're thought to be in a gay relationship. The law bans displays of affection for gay people, and organizations that defend same-sex couples are criminalized. LGBTQ plus rights around the world are more than just gay rights, though. Transgender people also face a lot of discrimination. However, some countries support transgender rights more than gay rights. Many of the countries that are least approving and the ones most approving for gay rights are the same for those of transgender rights. As similar to gay rights, those that are most supportive of transgender rights have a higher level of education and income. I hope I was able to give some good insight into the variations in acceptance and difficulties that the community faces around the world. However, the story is far from over, and eventually, the narrative of LGBTQ plus rights around the world will be brighter. Next, Jessica will go more in depth on AIDS.
you, Emily. My name is Jessica Suarez, and today I'm going to be talking about the topic of AIDS and its association with the LGBTQ community, how it became associated, why it became associated, and what were the results of this association. So I feel it's very important to, first of all, before talking about AIDS, to get informed and on what AIDS are. So AIDS is also known as HIV. HIV is what causes AIDS. It's also known as the human immune deficiency syndrome. Basically, the body's inability to fight infections. It can be transferred through blood, through semen, through vaginal fluids, and some of its symptoms include weight loss, fatigue, fevers, reoccurring infections, and ultimately death. Still to today, there's no cure that actually exists for AIDS, but there are some treatments and medications that help prolong life. So when talking about when it all started, it all dates back in 1970. This is when the HIV strain started the North American pandemic and made its way to the United States. By then, the sexual revolution was in full swing, and HIV was spreading silently among the gay male populations in large cities. During this time, LGBTQ activists across the country had made significant civil advances, served some of the state level protections against discrimination in public employment. Almost at the exact same time that the HIV cases began, the LGBTQ civil rights struggles received a reactionary backlash to what was going on. And this backlash was led by figures like Anita Bryant and Reverend Jerry Falwell. After a couple of years, soon the general media went as far as to label AIDS as the gay plague. This sort of bullying, toxic label became almost a joke within the general media. At this time, it had become pretty clear that Health and Human Services, the FDA, and the government were not prioritizing this disease as they should have, and it eventually took a back burner, while thousands of young men were losing their lives. Well, in the face of the government silence and the absent promises of a vaccine, AIDS activists began to create organizations to provide care for the patients who were becoming ill. One such group was called the Gay Men Health Crisis, founded in New York City in 1982, which is today the oldest HIV/AIDS organization in the world. By 1987, activists who were still frustrated by the government's inaction as bodies basically continued to pile up founded the ACT UP organization in New York City. Today, their actions and activism are legendary in speeding the government's response to the AIDS crisis, which ultimately allowed for quicker testing and treatment of life-saving drugs and drawing public attention to this deadly impact of homophobic public health care policies. On December 1st, 2016, the New York City AIDS Memorial was unveiled from St. Vincent's Hospital, dedicated to the 100,000 plus men, women, and children whose lives were lost to this pandemic. As of 2017, the AIDS epidemic infected an estimate of 77 million people globally and killed 35 million. We should be absolutely thankful to the LGBTQ community and all the men and women activists who fought so hard for the government to respond to this heartbreaking pandemic. Without them, who knows where we would be. Thank you once again, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Jaden now.
Thank you, Jessica. Hi, my name is Jaden Williams, and I'm here to discuss with you the mental health of the LGBTQ community and how they are at a high risk for depression. To begin with, the LGBTQ community celebrates pride, diversity, individuality, and sexuality. They are seen as a way to counterweight heterosexualism, biphobia, transphobia, sexualism, and conformist pressure that exists in a much larger society. Many of the LGBTQ community experience mental health struggles. The bisexual and transgenders are number one on that list, with being the most affected with them being part of the LGBTQ community. Social movements that organize around the acceptance and rights of people who today identify themselves as part of the LGBTQ community due to the responses of centuries of persecution by the church, state, and medical authorities. The different homosexual activity and or deviances from established gender roles and how people deserved were banned, which then allowed the population of people to know that others were different, And just because people were different, that doesn't mean that they would have to change who they were. It allowed them to be able to carry themselves how they would want to be carried, and so that all people would be equal. Though many of the members are resilient and picking up from when they are bullied or threatened as being a part of the LGBT community or just being gay in general or whatnot, there's still a lot of things that they face in their daily lives that the average or typical individual would not face, due to the fact that they are seen as different and people will look at them and feel like they are more than them or that they are above them. Let's get something straight. We were all created under one God who made everyone equal. Just because someone views someone as being gay or bisexual or whatnot doesn't give them the right to feel that they're above them, or that they have the right to beat them up or cause them any harm in any way, because like I said, we are all equal. Many people out there that are very prejudiced and stereotyped about being a part of the LGBT community or just being gay in general, which makes many of the people uncomfortable with letting their real personality out because of how people will react to it. They don't know what could happen. There has been many people that have died and been through a lot of things, but many of them have died due to this, back in the olden days and still in the present. Although when people openly express this part of themselves, they face the potential of rejection from peers, colleagues, and friends who can get a feeling of loneliness. Among the US, 4.5% identify themselves as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. Women are most likely to come out as being gay or lesbian, or let's just say they're more likely to come out to the LGBT community versus a man. Personal life of family and social acceptance of sexual orientation and gender identity affects being gay, being bisexual, all of these different things. Their individuality, their mindset, and how they go about their everyday life. There's many jobs that people try to get where it has been a problem as far as you being gay or whatnot, because they don't feel comfortable working around you because they feel, let's say maybe you would try something or whatnot. I think this is very important that we address this matter to let people understand that it's not about how you act or how people will look at you. It's about what you think of yourself and how you carry yourself. I think that it's very important that I'm talking about this to let people understand that like I said, we were all created equally, and no one should be above another person because they look at them a certain way or they're threatened by them. So that's the end of my speech. And here's Harrison to discuss race and trans murders. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Jaden. My name is Harrison, and I'll be talking to you today about race and the problems that LGBTQ people of color face. Diana Alexander, Dominique Jackson, Bianca Banks, Alexis Braxton, Jenna Franks. These are just a few of the over 35 trans people of color that were killed this year alone. Within the LGBTQ community, certain groups suffer even more oppression than others, particularly those of people of color. 3 areas I want to discuss today. First, discrimination as a compounding effect, especially amongst LGBTQ people of color. Trans people of color represent some of the highest rates of hate crimes and murders. And finally, people of color and trans people of color also face discrimination from within the LGBTQ community. To begin, discrimination is compounded. In an interview on NPR from November of 2017, the head of the National Black Justice Coalition, Isaiah Wilson, says that LGBTQ people of color are the most impacted communities when it comes to discrimination. People who belong to multiple marginalized groups feel discriminatory effects more than others. They are often passed over for jobs, have a harder time finding healthcare, and are treated differently when enlisting in the military. In a survey published in September of 2021 by the Williams Institute, a part of the UCLA Law School, 29% of LGBTQ people of color said they have been denied a job at some point because of their sexual identity. This is compared to 18% of white LGBTQ employees. This is an over 10% difference on the basis of skin color alone. While everyone's queer experience is their own and valid, some people face more dangerous challenges than others. Trans people of color are targeted more than any other group for hate crimes and murders. Over 35 trans people have been killed in the past year alone. In many cases, these murders are hate crimes. Many of the deceased are often misgendered by the police, and their deaths are not properly investigated as hate crimes. This is mostly due to personal biases against trans people within the police community. In the movie The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson, a documentary made for Netflix in 2017, Marsha's death from 1992 is reinvestigated. Marsha P. Johnson was a Black trans woman and an incredibly important figure in the Stonewall riots and a pioneer for the LGBTQ rights movement. Her death was deemed a suicide when she died, but people who knew her suspected foul play and are still fighting for justice for her today. This film exposes many of the struggles that trans people face, including being forced into prostitution in order to make money, threats from the police and organized crime, homelessness, and in Marsha's case, what was most likely murder. Unfortunately, people of color and trans people don't only face hate from external sources, they are also marginalized even within the LGBTQ community. Sexual minority men of color, especially Black men, are more likely to experience racial and ethnic stigma in LGBTQ spaces on top of LGBTQ stigma at home. Historically, there's a similar problem when it comes to trans people. In another clip from the aforementioned Netflix documentary, Sylvia Rivera, another groundbreaking activist and friend of Marsha P. Johnson, was booed off a stage during a Pride March in 1973. There was a feeling from other gays, lesbians that were just beginning to be accepted by the straight majority, and that trans people were mucking it up by being so different. Trans people felt like they were being pushed aside when they were the original frontliners at the Stonewall riots and began the gay rights movement. I like to think that this feeling has lessened since this example, but there's still transphobia running rampant across the world, from the police officer down the street to the politicians in DC. In conclusion, LGBTQ people of color, especially trans people of color, suffer from compounded discrimination. These members of the community are more likely to be targeted by discrimination from hate crimes from outside sources, as well as hate from within their own community. People of the LGBTQ community have been fighting for rights for a long time, and there's still much work to be done, especially in the Black and trans community. For now, I'm going to hand it over to Angelica, who will talk about rights that we have been able to make some headway on, including the right to marriage and adoption policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. My name is Angelica NG, and I'm here to talk to you about marriage equality and adoption policies. In 1973, Maryland became the first state to ban same-sex marriages. In 2004, 31 years later, Massachusetts became the first state to legalize same-sex marriages. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in United States v. Windsor and removed the section of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act that defined marriage as a union between a man and a woman. The Supreme Court ruled that this violated the Equal Protection Clause and is therefore unconstitutional. In 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court makes same-sex marriages legal in all 50 states. Finally, same-sex couples can receive the same benefits as heterosexual couples do. For example, Social Security benefits, tax benefits, federal employment benefits, and immigration benefits. Meet my uncles, Uncle Cham and Uncle Jamie. They've been together for 17 years and have been married since 2011. I wanted to share their story with you as one of many great love story outcomes from the U.S. fully legalizing same-sex marriages. On January 2004, they both met at a gay bar in Miami. This was Uncle Jamie's first time out into the dating scene just after moving to America from Costa Rica. When Uncle Jamie grew up in Costa Rica, being gay was not supported or allowed. He had moved to America to work for Chevron and held a temporary working visa that allowed him to live in America for up to 3 years at a time. To reside in the same city together wasn't possible for them because of Uncle Jamie's visa. He paid an immigration lawyer thousands of dollars to only be taken advantage of and still not being able to stay in America. He traveled to many countries like Singapore, and they continued to have a long-distance relationship up until 2009 when he moved back to America and they applied for domestic partnership in California. This still did not mean they were married in the eyes of the law in America, but this was special to them. They then moved to Canada, the last time they would move out of America before finally settling down. In 2011, the state of New York had legalized same-sex marriages, and they both decided to go to City Hall and make it official. This was unfortunately not the dream wedding that they anticipated, but this was a beautiful moment they cherished. They now reside in their permanent home in Houston, Texas, together with their dog, Rocco, and still in hopes of one day adopting a child. Just in 2019, Aaron and Rebecca Busk Sutton, a Detroit couple, claimed that Bethany Christian Services told them, "Same-sex couples aren't our area of expertise." The legislature passed a law in 2015 allowing private child placing agencies, including faith-based child placing agencies, to have the right to free exercise religion under both the state and federal constitution. There have been efforts to create laws that will require all taxpayer-funded, state-contracted child welfare agencies to accept all qualified families, including same-sex couples. However, this is still in the works. According to LGBT maps for foster and adoption laws, there are still 18 other states that do not have any laws to protect the rights for same-sex or LGBT couples to adopt. Texas being one of those states. Back to you, Harrison.
Thank you, Angelica. Today, we hope to have informed you about some major issues in the LGBTQ+ community as we completed the 6 colors to form the traditional rainbow. First, Tiffany talked to you about the history of the LGBTQ people and the rights movement. Emily discussed how different countries treat LGBTQ+ people differently, especially when it comes to anti-discrimination and marriage equality rights. Jessica talked about the HIV and AIDS epidemic and its effect on the community. Jane talked about mental health and how many LGBTQ+ people are at a higher risk for depression. I talked about race and how it can be a compounding factor of discrimination for many people, and how Black trans members of the community are targeted for hate crimes and murders at a very high rate. Finally, Angelica talked about marriage and adoption rights, including her uncle's own experiences with the marriage rights in America. I do want to mention there was a new flag introduced in 2018 that includes the colors black, brown, as well as an ode to the trans flag to represent these communities on the flag. We chose these specific topics as we thought they were the most important, and if we had more time, we would have chosen more to represent other issues currently facing the LGBTQ+ community. We know there is still a lot of work to be done to make people in the LGBTQ+ community become less of a marginalized group. We can all start with our own actions and maybe even influencing our friends and families. Please remember to always be kind. You never know how much of a difference that can make in someone's life. Thank you.